Hey, I'm Mel.
And I'm Andres, and you're listening to
Mixtape, your favorite Afro-Latin podcast.
What She Said.
We wanted to ensure that any music we produced was sufficiently profound, but also had the kind of rhythm that would allow people to dance and that speaks to the soul. Zouk is made of many influences. As long as the music grooves, there's passion, sincerity, and it speaks to the soul.
Today's track title is inspired by the song Zouk Party by Kassav.
Today, we're listening to Zouk Machine by the band Zouk Machine. Zouk Machine is a Zouk band founded in 1986 in Guadeloupe and led by the Afro-Caribbean female trio originally formed by Cristiano Vidal, Dominique Cyrille, and Joël Ursule. Joël left the group less than 2 years after its foundation to pursue her solo career, being eventually replaced by Jane Faustin, who stayed with the group for several years. Zouk Machine attained great success in the Antilles, and they also attained success in France, where their single Maldon was a top summer song in 1990. Being Afro-Caribbean women, the members of Zouk Machine were not oblivious to their African heritage. In a 2017 interview, singer Cristiano Vidal revealed that one of the most emotionally charged moments in her career was visiting Africa. She said that, I quote, "It was very moving and very evocative for us to set foot on the land of our ancestors." End quote. Today's song, Zouk Machine, presents a counter-message to the traditionalist idea of women having secondary roles in society. According to the author Joyce-lee, the song Zouk Machine provides an example of a feature of various lyrics in Zouk as noted by author Lambert Felix Prudhomme: a restoration of women's initiative and dignity, a lack of hesitation in women's will to become equal. Zouk Machine sings in Guadeloupean Creole, "Ou toujours qu'à décider, mais moment l'arrivée, faut pas dire moins à rien, ou sabjou la ça c'est à moins," which according to Jocelyn Guibault translates to, "It's always you who decides, but the moment has come. You cannot tell me anything, you know that the day is mine." Author Jocelyn Guibault argues that in the song Zouk Machine, I quote, "The woman wants to feel free, like her partner, to pursue her own dreams and fantasies." End quote. What a great way to start our exploration into the Zouk rhythm, don't you think? Welcome to track number 10 of our second season, Zouk Party. This is Mixtape.
Welcome to the Mixtape podcast. We are back after a summer sabbatical for another entry into our rhythm season. I hope you missed us. I'm your host, Mel, and I'm joining you from the DMV area of the United States.
And I'm your host, Andres, and I guess I'm still here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Oh, stability looks good on you, Andres. If you're a regular listener, we are so happy to have you listening in today. If you're listening for the first time, well, we're happy you're listening in too. And you should know that in this season 2, we explore different Afro-Latin, Afro-Caribbean, and African rhythms we encounter while social dancing. In one episode, we discuss the rhythm, and in the subsequent Were You Listening episode, we feature a song associated with the rhythm.
That's right, we discussed the history of the rhythm as well as the dance, the movement associated with it, and we also discussed how we can continue to center and recognize its Black roots. Our season so far has consisted of Afro-Latin rhythms, including samba, the complex of Afro-Cuban rhythms, the blend of rhythms we know as salsa, bachata, merengue, cumbia, reggaeton, bomba, and the African rhythm kizomba. We spent the last year and a half indulging in all of this musical and cultural richness that comes from the diaspora, so be sure to check those episodes out. For this episode, we are focusing on a Caribbean rhythm that, similar to the case of the cumbia rhythm, is now more known for the variations it sprung in the music and dance. But you know how we roll. We like going to the roots. The rhythm we are talking about today is
Zouk. So as per usual, our Zouk episode was encouraged by none other than Andres.
You know how it is.
While I joined in for the ride, of course. Tell us why you thought Zouk would be a good rhythm to explore, Andres.
Well, also, I guess I should say, as per usual, I was introduced to the Zouk rhythm back when I lived in St. Louis by my dear friend and former dance coach, Lauren Wilmore. Shout out to Lauren. She was getting into Brazilian Zouk, which people were calling just Zouk back then, and was offering some dance classes, so I decided to learn a bit of it. I even had a Zouk performance once, which, while I know I was just learning and it's okay, I still hope that no one recorded such video. I used to have conversations with Lauren about the way in which the dance of Zouk, as I was seeing it back then, appeared to me to favor white women with long straight hair. It seemed to me just another iteration of the whitening of another dance created by black people. Over time, I ended up focusing almost entirely on salsa, but I've seen the Brazilian Zouk scene grow in the US, and I wanted to take advantage of this project of ours to bring light to the Black Caribbean origins of the Zouk rhythm.
Well, I'm happy to report that I have once more learned a great deal from our reading, but more so from our knowledgeable guests that you will be able to learn from in this episode. I will say, this episode, like many of our others, was a labor of love. How many months did it take to complete this episode, you ask? A total of 4 months.
A whole 4 months, and we used the 4 months entirely. It has been a ton of work, so for all of you out there listening, we did everything we could, and I mean everything we could, to bring you really important guests, including one of the founders of Kassav, the music group credited with the creation of the Zouk rhythm. You do not want to miss what we have here for you today.
Our first guest is Dr. Dominique Cyrille. Dominique is an advisor for museums, intangible cultural heritage, and industrial scientific knowledge at the Ministry of Culture, French Guiana office. She received her PhD in musicology from Sorbonne University in Paris, France. We encountered Dominique during our research for this episode when we read her chapter, Ça quitte à nous, This Belongs to Us, Creole Dances in the French Caribbean, in the book, Caribbean Dance from Abacoa to Zouk, How Movement Shapes Identity. We asked Dominique to walk us through the history of the Zouk rhythm.
So Zouk only appeared in 1981 with the release of this album called Zouk La C'est le médicament, precisely one song, precisely, by Kassav. But it emerged in the 80s from everything that happened before, and primarily the mix of many things. Haitian compas music from the Dominican and St. Lucia also, actually, they had the cadence calypso, the type of music they were doing. And also the fact that musicians who became actually part of Kassav were also recording in studios in France, and they played rock and roll, French style rock and roll, all sorts of musics actually. And they really did meet at some point in the late 70s, early 80s. And primarily you had, of course, Jacob de Varieux and the Décimus brothers, who really had this vision of the kind of a new type of music they wanted to do that really took into account all their experiences. And one important aspect of Zouk was also to be based on the traditional rhythms of Guadeloupe and also Martinique. If I remember what they explained, that there are rhythms, specific rhythms that you can find in Belay and in Guoka. So these rhythms too were all these musics, really, all these musical genres. Some were dance music, I mean, for like parties, at home parties or balls and everything. And others were drummed music, drum dance music with a clear African origin. They mixed all these influences with, again, influences from North America, rock and roll music, to create something new, some new sound. And by the early 80s, they were ready to released this new sound, which they called Zouk. Why they called it Zouk precisely? Because the Zouk is a name that comes from Martinique. The Zouk, first of all, means in Martinique, always meant in Martinique, just a dance party. A place where people dance at home, you're getting together, you dance. That's a Zouk. And people used to play what they called musique Zouk, basically Zouk music in dance parties. And this is how they decided to create the new style, Zouk. So really, Zouk really incorporates everything that was there before. I'm sure there will be other music styles and genres that come into it, but these are the main ones. It's really a mix.
One way.
Since the 80s, it has changed a lot. At first, you had two types of Zouk. That was called Zouk Béton, basically hard Zouk, and Zouk Love. That was more like cool, I feel like thing like soft jazz or something. That's what they wanted. But then it changed a lot. It has changed a lot. And what they call hard Zouk, Zouk Béton, has, in my opinion, disappeared. And Zouk has evolved slowly to what it is now, and also was adopted in Brazil, actually. So it's played in many, many places around the world, in West Africa, of course, in Europe. Zouk at first was completely in Creole. It was songs in the Creole language. Now you have Zouk in all sorts of languages, and also in French, which to Caribbean people is kind of tells you of the impact, let's say, outside the Caribbean. What else can I say? And to me, of course, the people who created it are primarily the musicians from Kassav. And I just said the two Décimus brothers and Duventru-huret, Jacob Duventru-huret.
In Dominique's chapter, she says that, quote, the fashion for Zouk grew at a time when the Creole culture of the French Caribbean was being redefined in an attempt to take into account all of its cultural components, not merely those coming from Europe and Africa, end quote.
We found this quote especially interesting alongside our reading from the book Zouk, World Music in the West Indies. In this book, written by Joyce-lee, Kassav member Jacob Duventru says, I quote, our cultural problems have been covered up for a long time. People of my generation, or of the generation that followed, were ashamed to even speak Creole. We sing Creole and try to find expressions that sound good to show that Creole is as pleasing a language as any other.
So we wondered what cultural components were being accounted for in the creation of Zouk and the Creole identity.
You must have heard of this writing by Chamoiseau, Confiant, and Bernabé, three Martinican writers. They wrote this in praise of creolness. And creolness, why? Because Martinicans don't feel that they are simply descendants of a mix of Europe and Africa. We do take into account the large numbers of indentured workers who came from China, from India, and also from the Middle East at some point. Most Martinicans do believe that the population today results from the mix of all these influences, of all these groups, these ethnic groups, and that's what it is. This is what I meant when I said that Martinicans, and to a certain extent Guadeloupeans too, really feel that they are Creole in the sense that everybody counts, every group really matters. But although people only tend to consider Europe and Africa, but it's not just that. It's mostly Africa, and with a strong, very obvious connection with Europe, but also the contribution of the other groups is really important and really makes us who we are today. That idea was fairly new in the 80s, and it just appeared at the same time. And for a lot of people, Zouk, as I was telling you earlier, because Zouk was taking into account all the different music that people used to do in Martinique or close to Martinique, or that Martinicans would do outside, Guadeloupeans too, again, like Duventru-huret and Décimus, who used to play in studios in France. they didn't just play music from the Caribbean, they were also playing music from North America. So all these influences become all of a sudden crystallized into Zouk. Same way, the French Caribbean people felt that they were Creole, and as Creole people, they felt that every single aspect of their mix was important, because you have part of the musical instrument, let's say the bass is playing in a certain way that reminds you of certain type of music. The way the drums, in the very beginning, you had an actual guoka drum on stage with Kassav. For let's say the first 2 or 3 years, they actually had this drum, and the drum for them was absolutely, I mean, it was indispensable to really show their Africanness, their Caribbeanness, because that drum doesn't exist in Africa as it is, but that it definitely comes from Africa. So that was very important. It's really the way Zouk represents all this. It's really is the way it draws from all these different musics.
In our conversation with Dominique, it was clear that you don't have Zouk without Kassav. So we decided, why not let one of the founders of Kassav to teach us a little bit about Zouk? Listen, I can express how incredibly privileged and grateful we are to have had the opportunity to talk with somebody with the career, artistic stature, and humility of Pierre-Édouard Décimus, one of the 3 Décimus brothers we just heard Dominique reference as a creator of Zouk from the well-known group Kassav. We asked Pierre-Édouard to go a little further back for us, before that popular song Zouk la Cécile médicament uni. Pierre-Édouard's interview was conducted in French, which, as you know, neither of your humble hosts speak. So shout out to Anjuan Sun for her excellent translation services during the interview and in the script of this episode. The English voice of Pierre-Édouard's comments is presented by Thierry Hart, a Charlotte dancer and a dear friend of the podcast. Pierre-Édouard, tell us about the inception of Kassav.
Je vais commencer par le rapport de Kassav au Zouk.
I'm going to start by addressing the relationship between Kassav and the word Zouk. The word Zouk originated from Martinique and originally meant, and still means, a surprise party, or as the French language puts it, a saboum. It's a party that happens between close friends. When Patrick St. Eloi, a late member of Kassav, talked about Zouk, he would say this is Zouk. By this he meant, dear spectator, you're not here to attend a concert. Act as though you are at the saboum with your friends. Have fun, express yourself, let yourself live, and this is what Zouk is about. And then it's the audience who started naming Kassav's music Zouk. But the group itself had not invented the word Zouk, which has existed in Martinique since the 50s after the war. The original word Zouk back then designated a place where sugarcane factory workers would gather after receiving their paycheck. It was a very tribal atmosphere where workers played dice, cards, drank together, and played music, and there was food. It was rather a place of ill repute. And later in the 60s, the young people from the Martinique, when going to a saboum, began saying, we're going to a Zouk. When Kassav was created, 90% of the songs played during these parties originated by young people were from Kassav. So, from the 80s onward, the public identified Zouk with Kassav's music. But Kassav never came up with the word itself. It simply invented a musical style that the young adopted starting in 1982 to 1983, and gradually it became Zouk.
Dominique talked to us a little bit about the rhythms that make up Zouk, but we wanted Pierre-Édouard to expand on this some more. We asked what musical rhythms contributed to the creation of Zouk.
C'est une très belle question. Ça me permet de dire, en fait, que dans la musique...
It's a beautiful question. It allows me to say that in Kassav's music between 1978 and 1984, the group Kassav doesn't exist, but everything stems from the application of musical concepts that Jacques Derrida, George Décimus, and Jean-Claude Naimro and myself had fun maneuvering developing as researchers. They had one goal, to express everything they loved in music when they were younger. Blues, Haitian music, and especially Haitian compa, and many others. Therefore, in Zouk, one can find rhythms from Haiti, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Guiana, American music like jazz, and French yeye. It's self-inspired by American rock music. In Zouk, you can find all the music expressions that the youth in the 1980s loved and listened to. I would also like to add that you can also find calypso, reggae, and Latin music. All of these genres live with them. They used to listen to them on the radio and also were the kinds of music that parents listened to. Our childhood was steeped in all of these genres and they nourished our creation.
Oof, that song we just heard, Maman Creole, by Patrick Saint-Éloi and Kassav, is actually my favorite Zouk song as of now. Isn't it great? Bueno, sigamos. With Zouk made up by a blend of so many rhythms, we asked Pierre-Édouard, how would somebody know they are listening to the Zouk rhythm? What rhythmic patterns, sounds, and instruments characterize this rhythm, and how do people know if they are listening to Zouk or the sometimes very similar rhythm, Kizomba?
Alors, c'est le groove, et je peux dire ici que c'est d'abord...
Groove, first of all. At the start, I consider that all music coming from the depths of the soul is at blues. We wanted to ensure that any music we produced was sufficiently profound, but also had the kind of rhythm that would allow people to dance and that speaks to the soul. We found close proximity with American blues because both genres stem from the same historical roots. History gave us Children of Africa. In the United States, it gave us cotton blues, in Cuba, Son Montana, in Trinidad, Calypso, Bossa Nova in Brazil, Guaca in Guadeloupe, and Bele in Martinique. Any place history gave a child from Africa, there has been Creole blues. But when one says the word blues, the international subconscious automatically thinks of the U.S. only. Later, with Yaka Davru, we wanted to find a word that would represent us beyond the rhythm of Zouk, only or any if other genres. We found cotton blues and sugarcane blues because slavery was very much associated with sugar economy. But we thought these words were too long. Zouk is made of many influences, including the Americas, Europe, and Africa. We can find all the music of the world, but it's not precise enough. Kizomba, Zouk, Calypso, they have the same root, so I prefer to say groove. As long as the music grooves, there's passion, sincerity, and it speaks to the soul. Then, when it comes to specifically distinguishing Kizomba from Zouk, the audience is the one who will eventually decide whether and how they'll vibe with the music. Because it's too complicated to know which part of the rhythm will precisely distinguish them. The question of identifying Kizomba from Zouk is very difficult for me.
In the book Zouk, World Music in the West Indies, writer Jocelyn Guibault states, quote, "The fact that Zouk is a dance music cannot be overlooked. A music that can physically be experienced through dancing is more highly regarded in the Caribbean than any other type of music, because music, body, and pleasure are here closely linked." End quote. We couldn't talk about Zouk without dedicating time to its dance. We were fortunate to meet with London-based Zouk dancers Joyce-lee and Stanley Huret. Joyce-lee and Stanley are siblings and are both dancers, choreographers, and instructors of Caribbean Zouk, who describe Zouk as a cultural dance for them that they grew up with. We asked Joyce-lee and Stanley, how is Caribbean Zouk danced?
Zouk in general, obviously, it has started with Kassav. So let's say it's our parent generation. So the way they were dancing it obviously has evolved since then. We've been dancing since we're kids. So I've been dancing with my mom, and still today, if I'm dancing with my mom, and then I can see it's different from me dancing in the club. So, it's a partner dance, but also, especially with like the Zouk Béton, then we dance a lot on our own also, let's say there's a concert or, just enjoying the music. So basically it's a partner dance, but we also enjoying a lot dancing on our own, less on the Zouk love, because then Zouk love, the rhythm is slower and it's mostly more intimate, and then we dancing together. In the class, I like to say that it's a partner dance, it's an intimate dance, but and then it's a dance that you can dance with anybody, and then you will obviously adapt the way you dance regarding who you're dancing with. You can dance with your father or your brother, as I'm dancing with a crush or someone you don't know, just enjoying the dance. So then how intimate it will be obviously will depend on that.
What's really important about Zouk is the feeling, the energy, more than just the step. You don't have as many steps in Zouk that you have in Kizomba, in all those, even like Brazilian Zouk. It's more about the feeling to the music. Okay, so that's why it's very important to be in sync with each other.
Yeah. So yeah, basically facing each other, it's like it's a partner dance, but it's not like dance, so like it's like one in front, the other one at the back. This is the facing each other, and then the connection from the body will be more like around the hips, knee, like kizomba, and it might be more about the chest, while there it's more about around the hips.
Joyce-lee and Stanley continue to describe the dance movement based on the type of Zouk being danced, Zouk Beton or Zouk Love, as mentioned earlier by our guest Dominique.
Depends of which one you're doing. Let's say if you got the Beton version, this one is more bouncy, is more upbeat, is more But when you do, for example, you done some Zouk Love and you do un carreau, which is like one square, you're very close to each other. It's not as bouncy. It's done on the spot, okay, and it's a lot of move with the hips. You focus, you're grounded into the floor, and you're trying to relax, sink into each other, move. When you do, for example, you go back to the Beton one. In Zouk, you don't really move the upper body that much. You're not like, oh yes, okay. It's really much about the hips, okay. So there is a slight isolation that I think why not have on other. So maybe like on Kizomba might do more, or in other styles, add more chest or shoulders into it. We don't have that much. Is really much. I would say the most basic hip movement will be like the 8. For me, it will be the figure of 8 that you do with your hips. Okay, so that'll be like a very basic one when you dance with someone. You do that when you start like dancing, and after we'll see what we're gonna do next. But that's a good way to start.
And honestly, like it will really depend on the rhythm and the type of Zouk. Because how you dance on the Kassav, like Zouk classes, c'est le médicament, and then what you dance on the Zouk Love, completely. I mean, it's not completely different as the, let's say the feet will be working in the same way, but then, for example, the use of space will be completely different. While with Kassav, we can travel from this corner to this corner of the room. We'll be turning a lot, playing a lot with the space. While on Zouk Love, we'll be more focusing on our connection, like body connection with the partner. So it will be more on the spot, or just turning like, just around. So that will really depends of the reason, to be honest. I don't know if people are using all of this tool, but basically you can play a lot with the style if you actually adapt to the music.
Hey, I'm Mel, one of the hosts of the Mixtape podcast. I wanted to take just a minute to remind you that the Mixtape podcast takes an anti-racist approach to center the contribution of Black people and culture across the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora through dance and music. Follow us on Instagram at mixtape.podcast and click our link tree in the bio to learn more. All right, back to Zouk.
Joyce-lee talked about learning about Zouk while growing up. We asked, how is the way that Caribbean Zouk is danced today different from your parents' generation?
I mean, you know how parents will always say like, oh, nowadays, you guys, yeah. That's a fact, that's for everything. And I believe maybe we'll say the same thing for the future generation. But even like a few days ago, I was with my mom and then she was like, you know, me, when I was dancing, then I was doing this and that. So, I mean, I think, first of all, like the posture might be different, although you can still find these today, but the posture of the body, it was a lot more like this, like, you know, the chest was a lot more standing like this. Because even though when you were close with your partner, but then I think they were keeping that distance here, you know. But now people tend to be like, you know, together, one, just one. Also, to be honest, like the Zouk love evolved around the 90s, 2000. So basically, this is not something they grew up with. So they could not dance on these type of music because it was just not there. They grew up with the Kassav, so rhythm was completely different. So obviously, I mean, you still have Kassav, like, you know, serré. It's like a slow version of it. So yeah, you also have this slow rhythm that they could dance on. But Zouk love is really something of our generation. So we grew up with Zouk love, and then you know, the dance of Zouk love has developed at this time with us, let's say. Zouk love, as I was saying, you can't really travel the room on Zouk love just because the music doesn't allow you to do, you know, you won't be doing big moves because the rhythm is so slow and suave, if that makes sense, that it has to be underground, it has to be, let's say, I don't know how to explain, but you play with your own body and your partner connection instead of playing with the room. So, I mean, I've danced a lot with my mom, and what I was dancing with her, even on the Zouk love, you know, hand position most of the time will be like this, like the begin position. So one hand here, and then the balancing, let's say, will always be present, always. And but also before, it's just the name that different, but they call it la fuka. Yeah. So la fuka, I don't even know how we can say it today. Today, if there's no name for that, let's say la fuka will be when you have this this closest position when you're basically moving hips, you know, one to the other, if that makes sense. And this was called la fuka. So not everyone will enjoy do la fuka like now today. Not everyone will enjoy doing tarashinya, you know, but it was already there before. And then some people will do it, others tend to not do it. I think while Zouk love, it was much more common to do this type of move, just because the rhythm was slower. So basically, you know, it would just encourage you to do this type of move. And also today, because then they play less and less Zouk béton.
Yeah, more and more love.
Then naturally, the new generation just tend to dance in one way because they've been exposed to this more. There's also Zouk retro. Basically, retro means old school. So as such, literally it doesn't mean anything. But when we talk about Zouk retro, we all know about what type of Zouk we refer to. So basically, that will be Zouk from the 80s, 80s, 90s, and it's like you can hear that's a different style from the Zouk love, different style from the Zouk béton. And in terms of dancing, then I can say that's
in between.
That's a middle.
Is in between. Not to dancing, not
yes.
to
yes, so it's even the rhythm, it's in between. So it's slower, but then it's also dependent on the song, obviously.
So, yeah.
But then it's really a middle version of both style. And it was something really big also. And people will make the difference between Zouk retro and Zouk love.
For me, melanin, they call the police. For me, melanin, they call the police.
Here in the United States, when someone thinks about Zouk, they don't necessarily associate it with what Joyce-lee and Stanley described. Rather, they might think about Brazilian Zouk, which has grown in popularity. We met with a few US-based dancers to talk about how Brazilian Zouk is danced. One of those dancers was Ebonie Lee. Ebonie is a tech professional and dancer currently living in Denver, Colorado. Ebonie provided some context about the emergence of Brazilian Zouk.
Like Zouk history is it's so interesting to me. It's my favorite thing to teach and to continue learning because it's a combination of course, various stories. Everyone tells it differently. But we can't talk about Brazilian Zouk unless we talk about the lambada. Essentially, when I talk about like what is Brazilian Zouk, I first mentioned we're actually talking about a conglomeration of various styles, and essentially it's coming from the Brazilian lambada as dance to Caribbean Zouk music. And I remind people that the word Zouk is actually not a Brazilian term, but it's an Afro-Caribbean term. That's where I start. I have to mention that conglomeration, that combination of Caribbean Zouk as the music that people are dancing lambada to. And so I would say that when you start to trace that history, you start to see the lambada has various, or like the Brazilian Zouk has various influences from the lambada, which is a dance that was originated in northern Brazil by Afro-Brazilians and some indigenous Brazilian folks. And the lambada comes from the carimbo, which is a dance that was, from a combination of Afro-Brazilian and indigenous dance styles combined into one. And then various other forms of dances from Brazil, various parts of Latin America, and the Caribbean. So there's a whole list of those dances I could go into later. But I would say that when we talk about Brazilian Zouk, there's a flow to it. There's a rhythm that is commonly seen as in triple, and we have quick, or if we're doing kind of a sense of having salsa on one versus on two, depends on where we're doing the quick. But when we talk about Brazilian Zouk, the standard Brazilian Zouk, it's going to be slow on the one, and then quick. There's a lot of circular and kind of figure eight movement. There's a lot of head movement, and there's a lot of emphasis on flow. And depending on the music style, it can vary from highly syncopated to very flowy to basically nothing at all, and two people just hugging in place, which, some people have very strong opinions about that.
Too many be acting, they ain't active. I don't need you perfect, just a solid. I don't need you perfect, just stay solid for me.
In a couple of interviews in the late 1980s, cited in the book Zouk, world music in the West Indies by Jocelyn Guibault, Pierre-Édouard Décimus mentioned that, I quote, "We wish to create a more developed music, one more likely to be picked up and understood by non-Caribbean ears. And we wish to defend the colors of the Antilles and the Black diaspora of an international market. The ideology of Zouk is a current translation with the available means of the Caribbean musical sensibility, which enters into contact with all cultures." End quote. With this in mind, we ask Ebonie, has the popularization of Zouk across the globe minimized the Black Caribbean roots of the rhythm?
Back when I first found out about Zouk, because everyone was, back then people called it Zouk Lambada or Lamba Zouk. And there was a lot of confusion around all of that. But back then I would kind of Google it, or I would look it up on YouTube. And the only thing I could find like maybe 2 or 3 videos. And one of them was how to dance Zouk. And it was actually how to dance like Caribbean Zouk, which was not like what I was looking for, but I was like, oh wait, this is actually Caribbean dance. But then I noticed over the years, like when you kind of look it up on YouTube, you see less and less of that. You wouldn't, and now these days, if you like Google Zouk, like you find more and more Brazilian Zouk videos and articles, and I think shortening the name to Zouk has minimized that in the sense that like it's started to take over in the sense, and like you don't see as much representation of Caribbean Zouk music, or I mean, you see the music because you're dancing to the music, but you don't see as much of a dance represented in the videos. And so yeah, I would say that's one way it showed up for me pretty big.
As Zouk continues to gain more and more popularity outside of the Caribbean and across the world, we wondered, how can consumers of Zouk, like students, teachers, performers, and DJs, pay homage and center the Black origins and Black contributions of Zouk?
Okay, to give the real name of the thing all the time, because you have many times people from, let's say, Brazilian Zouk that call their things just Zouk, when it's completely 2 different things. Zouk, if you just take Zouk, that's the Caribbean version. If you do Brazilian Zouk, that's the one from Brazil. When they try to contract the thing, and in their head is Brazilian Zouk, that's why it confuses people, because it's 2 completely different things. Like, to know what we are talking about and be very specific with it. So if it's Zouk, it's Zouk, to code it by its real name, to not change it. You've got also the issue right now, for example, with many new songs, is that you have Zouk songs, but like in the same way music evolves, you have new instruments you can have now with the machine, you have with the computers, you can have like new tricks and stuff like that. But the base can be the same. It can be Zouk 2.1, okay, 2.0, whatever. But that's just Zouk. But sometimes as Zouk can seem not as trendy for some people, the name Zouk is like, no, they like to create their new style to say that, oh yeah, I've created something. But sometimes you don't need to create something to be unique. You just, if you're great and excellent in one style, that's enough. Michael Jackson did invent pop music, but he brought the pop music over there. So it's the same. You don't need to create a new style to be unique, to prove something. So there is a lot of new music out there that are basically Zouk, but they're called differently. And it's always important to remind people that, okay, those kind of music, those kind of songs, they're Zouk. There's no shame about saying that. Okay, we all love Zouk. That's the proof. Here's the proof that we all love Zouk.
One of the coolest parts about working through these episodes is getting an opportunity to simply take in information and learn. I tend to enjoy most things when I know more about it, so I'm really excited to get some more exposure to the Zouk rhythm to add to the very few times I danced it down in North Carolina with Aaron Montgomery. Y'all know who that is. Beyond making the connection with dance, I loved how we can make the connection with identity and lament to how easily this identity can be forgotten without care. It's one of the reasons centering Black roots of these rhythms is such a joy.
For me, this episode was an incredible learning experience, and you know how much I love learning. I even learned some French in the process, although je ne peux parler français. It was so nice to talk to our guests, and it was so rewarding after so much searching around to find literature that we could use to enrich this episode for y'all. Shout out to the music library at UNC Chapel Hill, where I found a really good book about Zouk.
Oh my God, we were so nerdy talking about all the ways that we love to learn. It's so cute.
You know, I really like Zouk. And as I think about how Zouk developed and about how Brazilian Zouk appears to have taken over the market outside of the Caribbean, I hope that something like what happened with the bachata rhythm happens with Zouk. I hope that people start getting interested more and more about the Caribbean original version of the rhythm and the dance, so that both versions can coexist and flourish, and so that we always remember and honor the Black Caribbean Creole roots of this rhythm.
Before heading out, we want to thank our guests from this episode. That's Dominique, Ebonie, Joyce-lee, Stanley, and the great, the infamous Pierre-Édouard Décimus from Kassav, who provided us with the information we needed to get a true sense of the Zouk rhythm.
And a big thank you to everyone, and I mean everyone, who helped in the construction of this episode. All of our guests, of course, but also our French translator, Anne Huansun, who was so good she got Pierre-Édouard Décimus from Kassav to complement her excellent services at the end of the interview, and who helped us a lot with pronunciation in this episode. Welcome to the Mixtape team, Anne. Thank you also to Charlotte-based dancer Thierry Hart, who kindly recorded the English voiceover for Pierre-Édouard Décimus, and big thank you to Pierre-Édouard's agent, Dominique Cyrille, who made the interview possible. Finally, thank you to Susan Micalcio, who did the beautiful graphic designs and animations for this episode. I hope I catch you all at the next Zouk party. Thank you for listening. This is
Mixtape. Thanks for listening to today's episode. To listen to the songs featured in this episode and songs featured in other episodes, check out the Season 2 playlist, which can be found at our new website, themixtapepodcast.com. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at mixtape.podcast, as well as Twitter and YouTube, which are easily accessed through our website. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for all our new episodes. Have any suggestions, questions, or comments? Email us at themixtapepodcast@gmail.com. You can also send audio clips of your reflections to the content to be featured on our episode. This episode is sponsored in part by the Orange County Arts Commission. Thanks for listening. This is Mixtape.